This is part 2 of our Steam controller review. Welcome to It Came From a Box. I'm Sergio AM, and this is the controller, but this time we're not even talking about it. We're talking about the software itself, so Steam and how it functions with the controller itself. Ever since I started working on part 2 of this review, Valve has introduced a number of updates, and I just can't keep up at this point, so I have to draw the line. I mean, just 2 days ago, they added an experimental rumble feature, which is really awesome and very fun, but since it's experimental, I think we can leave that for an update to this review. So let's not waste any more time. This is a long one, be warned. There's a lot that we have to cover, and let's get to it. This review will actually be split up into 3 parts, and you can access that here on the annotations or in the description below. In part 1, we'll focus on the hardware, the actual controller. In part 2, we'll talk about how the controller works with the software, and finally, in part 3, we will test it out on a number of different games so you can see how it actually works. Now I'm just gonna say it, if you're someone who's expecting a normal run-of-the-mill controller, there's a chance that you're going to be let down. Being that this is from Valve, it's pretty much tailor-made to be used with Steam, but yes, it also works with other games outside of Steam, just like all those other controllers you're used to, but you may have to face some hurdles along the way. So make no mistake of it, the Steam controller is meant to be tinkered with. If you're one of those people who like to adjust, tweak, and change little details on your keyboard or mouse, such as setting macros and reassigning keys, then you'll quickly fall in love with the potential that this controller has. For the purposes of this review, I'll be using Windows 10. The Steam controller should be, and I say that because the box has none of that info, compatible with any OS that can run Steam, so Windows, Mac, and Linux, which of course means it supports Steam machines. And the controller is also supported by thousands of games, but even those that don't support a controller at all can function with it due to how it emulates keyboard and mouse inputs, and we'll talk more about that very soon. And because Valve keeps updating the Steam controller so often, I'll list what version I'm currently using for this review. I do want to applaud them for the constant updates though. So many bugs were fixed and new features keep getting added almost, it seems, daily. So setting up the Steam controller is as easy as plugging in the USB dongle. So I already have that hooked up. Here I have Steam open, and when you first do this, you'll also get a small notification reminding you how to access Big Picture mode. With that being said, let's check that out. Big Picture mode is a full-screen console-like interface for Steam for that big TV you have in your living room. Steam doesn't really work that well for something such as the living room when you're sitting on a couch with a big TV in front of you because you're sort of far away. So that's why they have this option, and I'm personally a big fan of it. So here's Steam, and by clicking this little controller icon on the top right here, we get into Big Picture mode. You'll notice everything is nice and big and clean. It looks really good. Best part is that it's designed to be used with a controller. Hint, hint. So the reason this matters to us right now is that the controller options can only be accessed via, you guessed it, Big Picture mode. So now let's explore the controller options in the settings up here. Here where it says controller, we have 3 options. Let's check those out really quick. Add test being the first one. Here we can add a controller, and I'm actually going to add a second one now. Before we do this, make sure it's off, and then on the screen select add a Steam controller, and then just follow the on-screen directions. Hold both the Steam button and X while turning it on, which puts it into pairing mode. When it's discovered, it'll ask you to enter a specific validation code using a combination of the X, Y, A, and B buttons. So B, Y, Y, Y. Validation succeeded. Controller's ready. Pop up in the bottom right. Okay. After that, if your controller needs a firmware update, you'll get the notification right after, and I don't believe this one needs it, so I think we're good to go. Down here, you do have a few other options. In controller shutdown time, it's pretty straightforward. You can choose how long the controller stays idle before it turns off, so either 15, 30, 60, 120 minutes, or never. I'll leave it at 15 for now. And finally below that we have the detected controllers, and you can see all types of information pertaining to the ones connected. Here we now have one because I just turned off the second one. So when you select one, the side menu pops up, as you can see on the right, and we have the personalize button, In it, you can change the name of the controller, adjust the brightness of the Steam button, and they also give you the option of assigning custom sounds when you turn it on and off. So we have a default sound, warm and happy, invader, so all kinds of really cool 8-bit-ish sounding sounds. So back here, you can also register the controller to your Steam account, which saves all of these configurations so you can take this to a friend's house and still have the same experience on the go. Last few things, here you can identify the specific controller via the sound we assign to it, which helps when you have 2 or more controllers. Next, if for some reason the trackpad or accelerometer are acting strange, you can calibrate it to see if that fixes the issue. And here on the right, if you click support, you can actually test and see if every input on your controller is working correctly, along with all the detailed info on that specific controller, such as serial number and firmware versions. And then you hold back, you also get some of that info down here on the screen, such as controller firmware and receiver firmware. Now let's go back to the main settings screen, and in configurations, you get to tweak the controller options outside of games. For now, we only have access to desktop configuration, but down here you can see that they're planning to give us options for Big Picture and Big Picture web browser, which are coming soon. Alright, so let's go on here. When you're on a Steam menu or on the desktop, these are your current defaults, and you can switch those around to your liking, browse other configurations such as your personal ones from the community, etc., and you can even export your settings, as you can see down there. And the last option back here in the settings menu under controller, we have on-screen keyboard. In here you can choose which you want of the two, either standard or daisy wheel. You can then adjust how the suggestions for the default keyboard function, and of course you can change your language. Here's a quick look at both. In daisy wheel, you basically just use the thumbstick to select a section, and within that section you can use the X, Y, A, and B buttons to make your selection. Left button lets you backspace, right button is your spacebar, and more, as you can see down there. For now, let's avoid that like the plague and move over to the standard keyboard. Standard is really interesting because it divides a normal QWERTY keyboard in half, one for each trackpad, and the left and right triggers are used to make a selection. So at first it feels really weird, but after using it for a while, it's in my opinion the best way to type using a controller. And that pretty much covers all the controller options we have in the settings menu. I have to say that I really enjoy navigating around with this controller, and I mean outside of Steam, because they really nailed it with these settings. And to the point that I almost prefer it over my keyboard and mouse. So let's get to the desktop. By pressing this power button up here, we have a number of options: minimize big picture, exit Steam, log out user, turn off controller, and some more down there. But we need to exit big picture. And now we're back to our desktop. All right, so here's the desktop. Let's go to this browser here, and we're ready to go. The right trackpad is your mouse. The left one is a scroll wheel, which works by rotating around it. So clockwise is down, counterclockwise is up, and clicking is a middle mouse button. Now the right shoulder button is left click, and the left shoulder button is right click. Although that sounds confusing, it feels very natural, and I actually guessed a majority of those bindings before I even knew what they were. And of course, you could customize them as you wish back in that option we discussed before. One last note before we go back into big picture mode: a recent update, and this is I think only live on the beta right now, gives us access to the keyboard by simply pressing down on the thumbstick. That was added because Valve noticed that many people were using the controller outside of Steam for their home theater PCs. Really awesome to see that Valve is listening and paying attention to those details. So say you want to get back into big picture mode. Well, they worked out this way, which is pretty cool. So by pressing the Steam button, you push Steam to the front, and pressing it again brings up big picture mode. Now in here, the controller works more like other controllers you're used to. Very straightforward. You navigate with the analog stick, A lets you select, B is back, left button opens the web browser, and right button lets you access chat. Pretty straightforward. Next we'll talk about controller configurations. One cool thing about big picture mode is that you can filter your games to controller supported. I'll do that by going into library, we'll go into installed games, and then on the right here, you can set filters, and there it is, controller supported. All of these games are supported, but as I mentioned before, you can use this even with games that are not supported. So let me show you how that works. Let's open up TF2, which isn't controller supported. As you can see on the thumbnail, it has an icon with a little keyboard instead of a controller. So when you select it, you'll be greeted by this nice bright yellow warning that says controller configuration required. So that's what we have to do, we have to configure it. We'll go down here to manage game on the left side, and then we'll go to controller configuration. So this is our configuration window again, and there's a default already selected for us. Really cool. Here you can pretty much tweak anything you want with a ridiculous amount of options that let you do anything from changing sensitivity here to making this button do that and making that button do what that button does, and so on and so forth. We'll go over some of these settings in more detail in part 3, so make sure to check that out next. For now, let's check out Browse Configurations by pressing X. So as you can see here, we have the recommended configuration, which is what we have on by default. And I believe developer supported templates show up here as well, if any are available, of course. Below that, we have the same as before. You can save your own personal ones. And then we have templates, which you can use as a foundation to build off of if you want to do your own thing. And then also configurations from other games which you've created. The one I want to talk about, though, is the community one, right here in the middle. One of the awesome things is that you can upload your configuration and share it with the community. Here you'll see the ones people have created with the name at the top and the amount of people currently using that specific one on the top right. Some will also have a few notes to give you an idea of what they did or how it works. So let's go with this one at the top. Now it's loaded and you can change and customize anything you'd like, but I won't. So now let's go into the game. You may notice that Valve has started implementing the controller labels on their games, even though they're still not officially supported, which I'm glad to see them doing because it just helps so much, hence how we have these options down here. So the way this normally works is that I'll start off very confused, very lost, trying to figure out the bindings. And what I'll do is, let's say I figure out how one thing works and I don't like that, I'll press the Steam button, go into controller configuration and start messing with these. Change this, change that, fix that, adjust this, etc. Press the Steam button again, you're back in the game. Try those changes out. If you like them, keep them. If you don't, press the Steam button again, go inside, change this setting, adjust that, etc. Press the Steam button again, you're back in game. You can test that out really quickly, and by the time you know it, you'll have a configuration you're extremely happy with. Now, for those of you who are afraid of going through all of that, I would suggest staying away from the games that don't support the controller until you gain a better understanding as to how it works. But also, don't be afraid to just jump in and experiment, because if anything goes wrong, you can always revert to defaults. So, have fun with it. One thing that I'm tremendously excited about is support for non-Steam games, because one of the big fears I had when this controller was first announced was the idea that you wouldn't be able to use it with anything but Steam. Good news is, you can, as long as you have Steam running. So here I have Steam open, and on the bottom left I'll go to Add a Game. And then to add a non-Steam game. This brings up a list of programs, and then what you would do is add the game you want. I added World of Warcraft this way. Once you do that, it'll appear in your library as a shortcut along with your other games. And if you don't like the name which it took from the file, you can just right-click, go into Properties, and rename it. Now that we added it, we can start it up from either right here, or you can also do it through big picture mode. Doesn't really matter. Let's go to play. Alright, so let's go into Tiny Toes. Yeah, that's me right there. After it launches, you'll get a notice on the bottom right about the Steam overlay, so make sure you see that, because if you don't, that means it's not working correctly. If that's the case, I'd suggest closing the game and retrying. So now we're in game, and if you press the Steam button, you gain access to those same menus that allow you to access options and configurations, etc. The options I want to discuss are the controller HUD and touch menu. So down here we have toggle controller HUD, and if I press that, now in game, whenever I click or press something on the controller, it'll show you what it is from the keyboard input. So if you're having a problem remembering that A is probably Q, well, it'll pop up on the HUD so you can keep track of that. But the one I love is the touch menu, so let's talk about that. We're gonna go into controller configuration, and now we are going to do this to the left trackpad because we do need touch. We'll change the input to touch menu. So we press into that, these are our bindings for the touch menu, and as you can tell, there's a ton of other options as well. Now we can go into button count and change how many buttons we have on it. Let's go and keep it simple with, I guess, 4. Then you can go, change the position of it, horizontal, vertical, and you can assign your buttons here. Now I'm gonna actually make it the activation style, I'm gonna make it touch release, and I'll show you why right now. So there's advanced settings, and I'm not gonna actually set it to anything, but I'll just show you the basics right now. Let's go back in game. So now when I press down on the left touchpad, you can see these options, these little pads show up. Now if I let go, it activates the one I let go on, and that's why I set that out before. We'll talk more about this in part 3 though, because as you can tell, this will probably take a few hours. That's a joke, by the way. Finally, to turn off the Steam controller, you can just leave it until it hits the shutdown timer, but I'd suggest holding down the Steam button until you hear it turn off. So that covers a majority of how Steam, the software, works with the controller. In part 3, we'll test it out with a bunch of games, so make sure to check that out next. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. So thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video or have any questions, make sure to let us know in the comments below. Now, if you want to support the channel and help us out, feel free to click that thumbs up button and subscribe for more content. Of course, if you want to follow us and interact with us, you can do so on Twitter, Facebook, and a bunch of other sites, which I'll put down below. Thank you so much. My name is Sergio IM, and I'll see you guys for the next box.